You're not rewarded for working hard, you're rewarded for driving critical results. And you're not living in the time and effort economy, you're living in the results economy. So if someone can do what you just did in 10 hours and they can do it in 1 hour, what's the difference? I'm Michael Mogill, founder and CEO of Crisp, the nation's #1 law firm growth company. I've built my business through practice, not theory. Crisp started with just $500 to my name and has grown to over 8 figures in revenue over the last few years, earning a spot on the Inc. 500 list of the fastest growing private companies in America. Our approach has been to take everything we've learned about generating massive growth within our own organization and help the country's most ambitious and committed law firm owners do the same for theirs. In each episode of this podcast, I sit down with innovative market leaders from the legal industry and beyond to learn from those who thrive in the face of adversity, challenge the status quo, and define what it means to be a true game changer.
This is Jessica, Head of Coaching Strategy at Crisp, and today we're flipping the script for another special edition episode to get Michael's take on the habits and behaviors that all high performers emulate, the difference between being busy and being productive, and how to cultivate more discipline and commitment to achieving what you set out to do.
People make time for the things that are priorities for them. Let's not bullshit ourselves. Like, everyone's an expert in time management when they're complaining about the fact they don't have time. It's like, I don't have time. Well, you must be an expert in managing your time because you've been able to evaluate every second, every minute of your day to make sure that it's perfectly organized. But you're probably bullshitting half that day anyway.
That's coming up on the Game Changing Attorney podcast. All right, welcome back, Michael, to another AMMA.
I cannot wait.
These are your favorite.
I love it because I never know what the questions are. And I know the last time we did this, I got all fired up because these questions, they were wild. And I don't know what to expect today. I know you know what the questions are. Yes. Who knows what the answers will be? Before we get started, for those of you joining the podcast, what do we do around here? Okay, it's the Game Changing Attorney podcast. So we do 3 types of episodes. 1, you're listening to it, the AMMA. You guys submit your questions, and then I answer your questions. You can submit the questions to 404-531-7691. Can you imagine if you texted this number, what the response could be? It's a real number. I'll respond to you. And I wish more people took this opportunity. I'm literally saying, like, if you send a message to this number, I'll respond to you. Now, again, we get a lot of messages at this number, so you may not respond right away, but my aim is to get back to you in a day or 2. But don't ask me anything weird. I'm not going to send you any pictures or anything like that, okay?
Okay.
I know. We're going to probably edit that out.
Yeah.
Psych. Don't edit that out. Second type of episode is our traditional interview format where we bring on expert thought leaders from the legal industry and beyond. We've got some incredible guests planned for this season of the podcast, and we've recorded a lot of episodes that will be released in the coming weeks. I'm extremely excited with who we got coming up, and we've had incredible thought leaders, and not just attorneys, but elite athletes, authors, professors, all across the board. Anyone you could imagine, they've been on the podcast. And then finally, the encore editions, we bring back some of our most popular episodes of the podcast. We've done over 200 episodes now every single week for the last several years. So when people join the podcast, sometimes it makes sense to revisit a previous episode that was very popular, maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago or more. And then, we're going to change it up a little bit as we go because we brought in the ASJMA, okay? Ask Jessica Mogill anything. We did one of those recently.
Yeah.
Who knows where we will go? Now, first, word from our sponsors. Just kidding. We do not have sponsors. We do not run any ads on this podcast. The podcast is absolutely free. Now, it is not free for us to produce. We invest considerable time and energy and resources. It's a significant financial investment. The entire team we have producing this podcast every single week for you, it is a massive investment. We invest over 6 figures every single year in this podcast. So why don't we run ads? Well, because we want to be able to say whatever we want. And we want our guests to be able to say whatever we want or whatever they want. Can you imagine if I asked a guest to say what we want? Yeah, that'd be nice. So when you run ads or you have sponsors or you have anybody who's paying you something, well, then that can start to alter the formatting. And we're not going to let that happen. So all that we ask in exchange for keeping the podcast free is that if you get something of value, if we make you laugh, and this podcast is something that you enjoy, that you leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, share the podcast with a friend. You can do it right now, and we'll even reward you for doing so. I know we've been sending out some little special care packages to those that have been leaving some 5-star reviews lately. We just got to leave your name or the name of your firm. We'll send you something in the mail, something real, not something digital, not a webinar, not a Zoom, something real. So that's the aim. And the reason we ask for this is this helps us reach more people And when we're booking guests on the podcast, they're looking at to see, hey, how popular is the podcast? Because most of our guests, they're not doing other legal podcasts. They're doing big podcasts. I mean, Chris Voss was just on the podcast. He just did an episode with Andrew Huberman, probably one of the most popular podcasts on the planet. David Goggins was on the podcast. You know what podcast he was on prior to this? Joe Rogan. So we like to bring on guests that you don't hear on any other legal podcast, and we want to continue to do so. So if you love the podcast, spread the word, share the podcast, leave us a 5-star review. And with that, let's get on with it, Jessica. What do we got?
All right. I think you're going to like this topic this week. So I like to kind of hone it around and say, let's just think about commitment as we go into these things. So first question, I've been examining the behaviors and attitudes of my highest performing team members and comparing with them with those who struggle to make an impact. How can I coach my lower performers to perform at a higher level?
Well, isn't that the goal, right? We want everybody performing at a high level and at a high standard. So what do you do with the ones that are not performing at a high level while there are others that are performing at a high level? So the first thing you have to look at is saying, well, what do you control in this scenario? Like, what is within your control? Because if you look at it the other way, you don't control someone's effort, you don't control someone's attitude, but you do control whether that person knows what they're supposed to be doing. Do they have the proper training? Do they understand how to do their job, how to be successful, what great looks like? Do they have clarity on what the expectations are in their role? And if they do, because there's a reason why high performers are performing at a high level and low performers are performing at a low level, but if you can standardize it and say that everybody has been given the same training and development, everybody has the same resources and opportunities to be successful, that we have consistency across the board in how we're developing our people, they have clear metrics, clear expectations, the clarity, the kindness. Clarity is kindness. So then let's say all that is true. In most cases, it's not true. Okay, let's just be real. Chances are your high performers have been with you for a long time. They have a lot of institutional knowledge. They've learned by osmosis and existing at your law firm for many, many years. They didn't really get any formalized training or development, but they've been there for years and years and years, and they pick things up. And chances are when they started, they weren't that great, and now they're much better. And then your new performers, you're evaluating them by the standard of that. Let's say the high performers who may have existed already for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years or more, but let's say the low performers, they may not have had that same level of experience in training and development because they just haven't been there as long, for example. So what do you do about that? Well, you start by examining, well, once we've standardized everything, what are the habits of the high performers and what are the habits of the low performers? Are they approaching each day in the same way? Is their workflow similar? And if not, spend some time with a high performer and see, how do you go about your day? Like, what are the activities? Like, how do you prioritize? Like, what do you do all day? How do you manage your output? How can you have greater output and greater effectiveness than somebody else? Because you want to be able to model those habits and behaviors so that your low performers can learn from that. And that's how you standardize it. Because you see, if there's an outlier who's performing really, really well, let's see what they're doing and how they're going about their day and their week and their month and so on. And then let's make sure the rest of the organization models those habits and behaviors. Because chances are the differences between the two is probably knowledge, experience, training, and habits. Okay, so you want to make sure that you figure that out. Let's say the difference between the low performers and the high performers, do they have similar reinforcement, similar incentives and opportunities? I mean, are they motivated by the same things? They may not be. Okay, you may have somebody who's motivated by money, another person motivated by status, another person's motivated by PTO. But you got to figure that out because you got to make sure that the motivations are clear and that the incentives are driving everyone's performance as well. Then, have you defined a clear standard of what the baseline minimum is for performance at the organization? Maybe the low performers are low performers because they're allowed to be low performers, because they're allowed to exist. They're still at your firm. They may not know that they're low performers, or maybe they do, but it doesn't matter because they're not getting fired. They're allowed to exist performing at the level that they're currently performing at. So maybe you need to make clear what the standard is and reinforce that standard. And by reinforcing it, you say that here is the non-negotiable of what the minimum is for the output and performance in this role. And that could be different things. And you got to set key performance indicators and metrics of what that looks like so somebody has clarity on what is expected of them. And if you do set that and say it's a non-negotiable and it's a standard, well, what happens when somebody performs below that? If they're allowed to exist, then the level of their performance is actually the standard, not the standard you've set. If there's not some sort of repercussion or reinforcement or something, their performance is actually the standard. And then your high performers are just performing above the standard. So make sure that your expectations are clear, that you're reinforcing it in the right way. But most importantly, just make sure that everybody knows what they're supposed to do. They understand how to perform in their role. They have proper training and development and onboarding. They have proper support and the resources to be successful, because those are things that you control in your organization. And if once you've normalized for all of those things, all the things that you can control, now you can start evaluating and saying, well, is the effort there? Maybe the attitude's not right. Maybe the mindset's not there. Again, you could influence these things, but they're outside of your control. And if you're providing someone with all of the things that they need to be successful, really, like if you're honestly doing this, because most people are not, but if you're honestly providing everyone in your organization with everything they need to be successful, and then you have somebody who's not performing at that standard, well, then it's time for a different kind of conversation.
Absolutely. Could not agree more. That's such a pain point, communication and clarity. All right. Number 2. As a solo practitioner, I often find myself struggling with burnout and overwhelm due to my tendency to work late into the night for a few extra checks on my to-do list. Surely there must be a better way. We've been there.
Yeah, listen, I think any entrepreneur has been there, working late into the night. There were times, years and years, where I don't recall even seeing daylight. You wake up early, it's still dark out. You come into the office, you're inside. By the time you leave, it's dark out again. I don't remember what daylight looks like. And then you're doing that 7 days a week. So it becomes the norm, and you're like nocturnal in nature, right? Like a nocturnal creature. So what I will say, though, in this scenario, if you find yourself working late into the night, trying to check off extra items on your to-do list, the interesting thing about it is that I think hard work is non-negotiable when you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to build something, especially in the early stages of building a business. Those long hours, it's hard to get around that. It's not impossible. And anyone who tells you different of saying, well, there's an easier way where you don't have to work long hours, especially when you're starting out and you don't have any money, you don't have any support, you don't have any people, they're trying to sell you something, okay? That part is just what it takes. But as the organization grows, now you have support and you can increase your capacity and you have different people that you can lean on and delegate to, so it shouldn't be forever. But if you find yourself working late into the night, checking off those extra items off your to-do list, it's important to differentiate between, are you just simply being busy or are you being productive? Because I've seen a lot of leaders now associate their identity with checking things off a to-do list. And, to-do lists are like email, right? So I know a lot of leaders and a lot of people that it's important for them that by the end of every day, they got to be at inbox 0, right? Which means that they clear out every email, they respond to every email. But emails received is a function of emails sent. So if you respond to 100 emails and you clear out your inbox, what do you think is going to happen an hour later? You respond to 100 emails, you're going to get 100 back, maybe a little less, maybe 80. So if that's the goal, is that really what's moving the needle in your organization? Because email is like a to-do list that somebody creates for you. It's not a to-do list you create for yourself. So it's really associating and understanding, what is it that I'm doing, and is this actually moving the needle in my law firm, or am I just associating busyness with productivity, which is not always the case. In fact, it's rarely the case. And sometimes we feel like we have to be working late and we have to be checking off just that extra item off that to-do list because we associate that with a little bit of that dopamine, that this is what's driving productivity, when in reality, it's not setting you up for success the very next day and the very next week, because now you're up late, you're not getting a whole lot of sleep, now you're sleep deprived. The tasks that would normally take you, 30 minutes to do, now take you 2 hours to do. But you're working late and you're working a ton of hours, but then you're getting a lot less done. So it's really looking at not just how many hours am I working, but more importantly, how effective am I being? And the only way you can ensure that you're doing the right things is if you zoom out and you actually set your priorities. So for example, every single month, I've got my top 3 that need to get done that month. And every single week, I sit down with my executive assistant and we lay out the top 3 items that need to get done that week. And then every single day, at the end of each day, I lay out what are the top 3 items that need to get done the following day. So if it's like the end of the day on Monday, I lay out the top 3 for Tuesday. And I already know what the top 3 are for the week and what the top 3 are for the month. So that's kind of my North Star in a way. But that way, when I go into a day, I can look at it and say, look, if I get these 3 things done and nothing else, this is what's going to move the needle in the organization. So it keeps me from focusing on a lot of bullshit. Because if you don't have any focus or direction, well, then you're going to just continue to pile up things to do. There's a never-ending list of things you could do. I mean, it never ends. And if you're going to say, hey, you know what? Today I checked off 50 items, and tomorrow I'm going to check off 60 items. Those people stay very, very busy, but they also stay very, very broke. And they can't understand why, because they believe, well, I'm working hard, and shouldn't I be rewarded for working hard? And the answer is no. You're not rewarded for working hard. You're rewarded for driving critical results. And you're not living in the time and effort economy. You're living in the results economy. So if someone can do what you just did in 10 hours and they can do it in 1 hour, what's the difference? They're much more clever, not in an academic sense, but as it turns out, they're working in a very smart way. And the best leaders, they don't just work smart, because then people hear this stuff and then they try to figure out, they start going AI, automation, and outsourcing. And then they're just figuring out how do I just get a bunch of robots to do all the work for me, right? And they just overcorrect in the other direction. So what I've seen in my experience with leaders that have built 8-figure, 9-figure organizations and beyond is they're working smart and they're working hard. And that combination, that's a dangerous combo. So meaning that they're putting in a ton of energy and effort, but they're doing the right things. And it's important to make sure that if you're burning the midnight oil, right, the candle, both ends, and speaking of burnout, right, and is burnout even real? Let's be honest. Why are you burned out? Are you burned out because you don't believe in what you're doing? Are you burned out because you're tired and exhausted and you don't have mental clarity? Let's say you feel burnt out today. Let's say you feel completely burnt out. And I say, you know what? You've just won $10 million. Are you still feeling burnt out? I don't think so. Maybe that burnout just went away. You're like, oh, great. I feel good. Energy. I'm back, baby. So let's examine why you feel burnt out. And a lot of that comes because you either are spending your time doing things that are not your strength, that don't give you energy, that leave you exhausted, you're frustrated, you don't know what you're doing. It could be a variety of different factors. But I would start off, and this also has like 100 different solutions, to be completely honest. And we coach law firms on this all the time. Somebody comes into our, Chris Coach program and they're working 80 to 100 hours a week. The last thing they need is, let me give you 10 more things to do. You're already overwhelmed. So it's not about giving you more things to do. It's helping you get more things done. So when you're burning that midnight oil, it starts with having focus over what are the critical results and what are my priorities. And if you got your top 3 done every single day, and that top 3 done every week, and the top 3 done every month, and you do that every single month, it's inevitable. You're going to get to where you're going. The problem is you're doing everything but that because it feels like productivity, like answering emails. And I know someone's going to be like, yeah, but what about a client email? And you don't have to respond or whatever. Look, you're checking bullshit emails. You're checking like little shopping, e-commerce nonsense. You're going back and forth on a 50, let's say reply thread, an email, and then you're not expanding your support team. So now you're always caught up in your inbox. Every time you go on vacation, you bring your laptop with you. You're stressed out, you're overwhelmed. And if you're so successful, then why are you working 80 hours a week? So yes, there is a better way, but it starts with having clarity of your priorities and having clarity of your focus and actually being proactive. And that way you don't fall into the trap of being that little gerbil, right? Running that little wheel and saying, but I'm working so hard. Why am I not successful?
Focusing on the wrong things. All right, last one here. At the beginning of the year, I set a goal to add a new practice area to my firm. Since then, I find myself procrastinating and struggle to prioritize this over my day-to-day work. How do you suggest I cultivate more discipline and commitment to achieve what I set out to do?
Well, this one's interesting because you want to add a new practice area to your firm, but you're not doing it because you either don't have time to, so it's what it sounds like, or you believe you don't have time to, or something always comes up and you feel it's like a discipline or commitment issue. Could be. I don't know that enough on that question alone, but I would start asking yourself first and foremost, why do you want to add a new practice area to your firm? Because if it's a would be kind of nice sort of thing, well, that's exactly why you're not committed to it, because it's not a must, meaning that life goes on without it and you can continue to experience the current status of your life and your law firm as is. Maybe the upside is not high enough, or maybe the existing reality isn't bad enough. I mean, I'll tell you, like, if you had no choice, I'll give you an example. Let's say your current practice area, they passed some legislation, you can no longer practice in that practice area, or they cap the fees to an amount that just does not allow you to be able to grow your business or be able to make any sort of profit at scale. Just doesn't. Now you're like, we're starting a new practice area today. Okay. There's no procrastination happening here. There's no issues with like commitment. You're in survival mode. But if it's the kind of thing where it's like, hey, it would be nice, well, then maybe there's just not enough upside associated with it, meaning that if the upside is like, we're going to make a little bit more money, well, maybe you're fat and happy and you're making, the money that you want right now. So what does more money get you? And there's not enough of a transformational kind of purpose here. But if adding that in practice area would allow you to take care of your family and support everyone around you and be able to empower your team and be able to expand your office and be able to just achieve this vision that you've set of being able to serve X number of people in your community and in multiple communities. Now we're talking. Now you're like, all right, now we're going to make it happen. So like this whole thing about procrastinating, I'm not going to find time, whatever. It's like, look, people make time for the things that are priorities for them. Let's not bullshit ourselves. Like everyone's an expert in time management when they're complaining about the fact they don't have time. It's like, I don't have time. Well, you must be an expert in managing your time because you've been able to evaluate every second, every minute of your day to make sure that it's perfectly organized. But you're probably bullshitting half that day anyway. And if something had to get done, it's like Parkinson's law, right? The idea that like kind of time expands to fill itself. However much time you have, that's how much time you use, right? So if you give yourself a month, it's going to take a month. If you give yourself a week, it's going to take a week. And this is the same reason why when you're getting ready to leave for vacation, the day before, you happen to get so much done, such a productive day. It's because you have to, right? Because you want to leave the office. So you got to close, a lot of loops. So first foremost question is that you're not going to be committed to something you yourself are not sold on, because it sounds like you want to add another practice area, but I don't know that you are committed to adding another practice area because perhaps there's not enough of a transformational impact associated with it. And maybe your firm is making right now, I don't know, $10 million is an opportunity to make $12 million. And you're like, who gives a shit? I'm making 10. What's the difference of 12? Maybe we buy some nicer shoes. I don't know. But if this is an opportunity to ensure that the firm is going to be competitive for years into the future, this is an opportunity to double the revenue. By doubling the revenue, you're able to hire additional attorneys, additional support staff, invest in your marketing, etc. Well, now that becomes a little bit more worthwhile. So you got to stop shooting all over yourself, and you got to make sure that you evaluate things of saying, is this a should or is it a must? And the must you'll be committed to, but you got to make sure you have a clear why for why you're doing something. Because if it's just like, oh yeah, it'd be nice. It's like someone saying, oh, we'll grow by 10%. I'm like, is that meaningful for you? Yeah, but we're going to grow. Yeah, but you don't give a shit. So it's probably not going to happen.
All right. That's all we got today.
We will see you next time. Pay the fee, leave a review. Thank you, guys.
You've been listening to the Game Changing Attorney podcast with Michael Mogill. If you found this episode valuable, here are 3 free ways that we can help you grow your law firm. Number 1, download the first chapter of Michael's book absolutely free at gamechangingattorney.com. Number 2, you can shoot Michael a text at 404-531-7691 and ask him any question you'd like. You might just hear the answer on the next episode. And finally, number 3, if you can leave this podcast a 5-star review, it will help us gain access to more influential thought leaders and bring their lessons learned here to you. For more information on this episode, see the show notes in your podcast app or visit legalpodcast.com.